Hello. In this clip from our Justia webinar, Thriving at the Crossroads of Law and Business in the AI Era, Tom Shack will discuss the differences between legal ethics and law. If you want to see more Justia videos on law practice and legal marketing, be sure to subscribe to our channel.
Now we're going to talk a little bit about, this is sort of the last stage of this presentation, so hang in there. Legal ethics versus the law. And this is also an area where, attorneys get into trouble all the time, and you got to think about it. So you have to remember that the laws are not ethics. The laws are what society has created in order to impose its moral compass and duties. So from a legal standpoint, the law is what morality, what society says morality, what you shouldn't do if you're going to be a moral person. Now, there's obviously, exceptions to that, but for the sake of this argument or this discussion, let's just go with it. So the law is always going to be more significant and is always going to take precedent over legal ethics, right? And you can get into situations where there is a moral duty to obey the law, but obeying the law might result in you violating the legal ethics. So, those are the types of conundrums that you can run into. And so you got to understand that ethics is a much more, broad professional issue than the law. I mean, the law is typically, it's in a set of books, it's in a set of books behind me. But ethics, on the other hand, requires judgment and discussion and constant thought. So professional ethics is more broad than the law, and the law is not going to be specific about about defalcation and taking a client's resources or money. And remember, you can still be unethical without behaving illegally. You can be doing something that's unethical, but it's not illegal, right? And you can think of some kind of clear and obvious examples of that. And then rarely, ethically, you have to resist the law. So let's use an example. If I am what's the best one? If all of a sudden there's a law that's passed in Massachusetts, and it's signed into law by the governor. I used to deal with that as comptroller of Massachusetts all the time, and having to interpret, laws both from an ethical standpoint and a legal standpoint. But there are times when legislators will create a law that, that you're not violating by taking that action or engaging that behavior, but you're still under the ethical rules of our profession. So please keep that in mind, that that there are times in which ethically you'd have to do something that's an opposite of the law. If you get in that position, if you find yourself in that position, it's to a certain extent it's sort of like the opposite of a Perry Mason moment in your career. You have a few of those things happen over the course of your career. If that happens to you, you should be reaching out to your bar right away, to your particular state bar, and you should be making sure sometimes you have the ability to call in and be discreet without having to identify yourself, and you can just ask a question of one of their ethics lawyers. But just keep in mind that that those are very, very unique situations, but they happen. I can say that it has happened to me, and since I know that that challenge exists, I think it's important for you to know. All right, so on to the final rule, model rule 1.6, and that's confidentiality. Now, look, this is a lot of verbiage. It's a lot of word salad, but you pretty much know what confidentiality is, right? You just have to understand something. And particularly as it relates to some of these systems that we're talking about from an AI perspective. And, what do I mean by that? Well, there are several large AI producers. In other words, companies that have been established within the law for a very, very long time that have put out products that are AI related. One of those products, I'm not going to say specifically what it is, but with one of these products, you can actually upload documentation, your library of documents, into a database in the cloud, right? And then you can utilize the AI technology to scan all of your documentation and all of the stuff that you've uploaded, and find documents for you, find issues for you, and find things much more quickly than if you say, well, I remember working on something like that in 2010, but I'm not sure, I can't remember the name of the parties. So just keep in mind that if you're going to be utilizing these systems and you think, uploading client information, if very specific, if you're uploading client information that would be, considered private or covered under the attorney-client privilege, then you absolutely must make sure that you that any information that you upload you have to have an assurance. It's got, and I'd have it in writing from that company that says, nobody, no kid who works for us is working out of their parents' basement, someplace, in the corners of Massachusetts. I can't have, that kid who's a non-lawyer, who's maybe a UX, a user experience or a user interface expert, but again, not a lawyer, living in the parents' basement using their computer. Well, if they have access to my documents, that can be problematic. Let me give you an example. If I represent a political client, which we do on occasion, if I represent a political client and I have all of this documentation that might be negative, right? Negative information for my particular client and politician. So I upload all that information, and I use it, to download regularly, to scrape it regularly for certain things that I might want to use, factual basis, etc. So the next concern is if the kid in the basement has access to your documents, and it just so happens that they take a look at the documentation and they say, wait a minute, this person, whoever your client is absolutely the opposite of what I want to see in a politician or in candidate. So, without really, other than making a promise to his bosses or her bosses, that they're not going to do it, you are on the hook for that. So can you imagine if all of a sudden, you have a national candidate or a statewide candidate or even a local candidate in which that confidential information turns up, because the kid in the basement provided it to your local newspaper, all of it. You're croaked if that happens. And not that, but it's going to be provable because you've created this electronic record of uploading the information. So that's the type of information that can be the type of AI that can be very helpful, but is also very, very dangerous. So think a couple of layers down when you're using this stuff. Think about the accuracy. Where is it drawing its information from? Where is the system drawing its information from? Some of them are very closed universes. They don't use Chat GPT and the other sort of ubiquitous AI systems that are evolving. So you want to make sure that the system is closed, so that the system, that the AI search is not going and looking for cases that don't exist, for instance. So make sure that you pay attention to that, because again, not only humiliating, but instantly actionable by a court and instantly actionable by a bar. All right. So again, for the record, it's not a comprehensive and only outlines the basic premise of the rule. Please see the ABA rules for a complete description, and there's the link. So we have to make decisions about law and ethics ultimately. And as we've said, law almost always wins over ethics, but not always, right? So it's like Occam's razor. You're in a position where It's not a law; it's a razor, and it happens almost all the time, but not always. And I wouldn't want to come up across that, not always, on the wrong side of that, not always. So be very careful not to embark on an exercise in ethical analysis when there's a clear legal rule that obviates the entire process, right? So if you're going to spend your time doing something or advising the client to do something that is going to be illegal, now, obviously, typically we wouldn't do that. I mean, or we probably get disbarred. But it's important to just recognize that the law, because it trumps ethics, you can't just sit back in front of the bar folks and say, well, the law said I could do it. If there's a rule, and remember, we're self-policing. So if there's a rule, you better pay close attention to it. All right. And then here's where professionals, particularly lawyers, often fail, and it can happen in business too. Here are some of the the key issues: plagiarism, leaking confidentiality of data, fake data, criticizing colleagues for gain, holding back, disguising data, destruction of data, not reporting incidents deliberately, strict adherence to rules where harm is obvious. And that's really described as malicious obedience. That's a Jesuitical term, but that is just you're following the law and you're following the rules, and it's harming other people, but you don't care. You're just obedient to the rule. So these are the areas that you really have to be aware of, where there's a significant difference between what a person in business might be able to do, and think of the plagiarism aspect of AI if you're having it write briefs for you too. I'm not saying that it's plagiarism, but it's certainly not your original work, and that's something you have to take into consideration as a lawyer. All right, now finally, how to handle any ethical question. Again, and this is all of this because it's really, again, more of a razor than the law. But the first thing you have to do is take a look at the consequences. What happens if I act? What happens if I don't act? What is, what is the, what you're good, you're obviously going to stay on the side of law. But what next? What do you do next? You always assume that you have a variety of options, and you consider the range of both positive and negative consequences of each. And then who will be helped by what you do and who will be hurt, right? Let's go back to my doctor example. My healthy example of wanting to take my organs, to save 5 other lives. Again, you will probably hear a voice in the back of your head that tells you what the right thing to do is there. After looking at all your options, which one produces the best mix of benefits over harms, right? So we always, just like our legal standards, if you operate in criminal court on a beyond the reasonable doubt standard, most often then you're on the hook for that scale, right? For to make sure that that you're doing again from an ethical standpoint, in all of your options, you're doing the least amount of harm possible, and then if you're inclined to the most amount of good. You can start by not doing the bad stuff. All right, and then again, this is it. Time constraints and monetary and political pressure can increase pressures to conduct yourself unethically or immorally. There's one caveat that you don't have time to, if you don't have time to thoughtfully analyze a situation, and that is you almost know. This is what I just mentioned before. You almost always know the right thing to do, and almost everybody has that voice, of conscience in the back of their head that says, "Don't do this" or "Don't do that." If you don't know your options, listen to that voice. I mean, if you're in a position where you have to make a decision this minute, listen to the voice, because that voice is typically, if you're a well-trained lawyer and a well-experienced lawyer, then you're going to be in a position where that all works. All right. And finally, you have one name and reputation. While folks won't always remember the ethical or moral good you do, they rarely forget the bad, right? I mean, with only one name and reputation, you can destroy yourself, with one bad decision. So keep that in mind, do good things, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did enjoy it, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more law practice and legal marketing videos. See you in our next clip.